Kirsten. Where's Kirsten?
No.
Kirsten, come on up here for a second. Yeah. And can we get, go ahead and grab one of these mics, and then if our sound guy could please get some sound on there.
You just grab your mic.
My mic is gone. Oh, wait. No, it's actually not. Hold on. Sorry. I apologize. Anyways.
Kirsten, how you doing? Do we have sound on there? Hey, your shoelace is untied too, okay, so don't trip and fall.
Okay. Technical difficulties. Give me a second.
Hi, everybody. Hey, we're going to be in 2 Corinthians chapter 11.
Okay.
Finally going to finish up chapter 11, so we'll be there in just a second. But I wanted to talk to Kirsten for a second. Most, if not everybody, knows Kirsten. And you know that she is taking off for Idaho pretty soon. And so this is actually her last Wednesday in here. She'll be here on Sunday, I'm assuming, except I'll see you, but I'll be out at the burrito sale. I didn't plan that on purpose.
So I should be there too.
You should definitely stop by. But this is Kirsten's last Wednesday night with us. And would you just tell us why you're going to Idaho? What's the whole purpose of you going to Idaho?
My dad is going to go work and be a pastor at a church that my uncle started. So he's going to go work at Calvary Chapel Star.
Okay, so Calvary Chapel Star. And so her family is by faith. They are taking off, leaving Southern California, heading to Idaho, to Star, Idaho. Star, is that the name of it? Star, Idaho.
Yes.
Okay. And so Kirsten is leaving. And we prayed for her at camp because it was her last camp with us. And we're going to pray for her again tonight. And you okay? It's funny. I keep teasing her because it's like every time we talk about you leaving, you laugh like you're really excited. But as she told me that she said, I gotta laugh or else I'll cry. So we are gonna pray for her right now because it's her last Wednesday. Again, we'll still see her on Sunday, and then you guys are actually leaving on Valentine's Day. Yeah, that just I don't know. Just somebody said traitor. But yeah, we'll do that. We'll do that. Yeah. But you're sticking around for Sarah's birthday? Is that the thing? You're waiting because her birthday's on Monday.
Well, I'm actually not going to see her on Monday because she's going to Disneyland.
All right,
and
let's
she didn't
just,
buy me a ticket. So.
All right. With that, let me go ahead and pray for Kirsten, and you can just agree with me right from where you're at. So, Father, I want to thank you so much for Kirsten, and Lord, we are going to miss her here dearly, and her excitement, and just her bubbly self, her bubbly personality, and her jokes to start out our services, Lord. We're going to miss all of these things about Kirsten, but we're so very thankful that Kirsten's not leaving for a bad reason or wrong reason. We're not saying goodbye to her because she's falling away from following you. It's because her dad and because her family and Kirsten are leaving again by faith to go to Star, Idaho, to go and minister. And so that's a wonderful, wonderful reason to be leaving. But we want for her to be blessed as she goes. Now we're praying for a blessing on her dad, Nate, and the whole family. But because we know Kirsten, because she's dear to us, we're praying that her time there, her transition, would be, that it would be a good transition. Whether it's smooth or rough, that's not for us to decide. But what we are requesting is that it would be a good transition. That everything about it would be lessons that she can learn, valuable things that will bring about maturity and growth in her. But even her time there after the transition is, as she gets into the church and meets new people, we know that they're going to love her. And we're just sure that she's going to find a great group there. But we're praying for the young people in that church and asking that you would bless the youth, the high schoolers specifically, and that Kirsten would find a good, healthy, growing group there where she could get in there and just minister, continue to minister, and maybe it's through worship, whatever it might be, but that you would just bless her path there. We're so very thankful for her, and we pray that you would bless her. We pray these things in Jesus' name, and everyone who agreed said, Amen. All right, Kirsten, God bless you. 2 Corinthians chapter 11, we've taken this in three parts, which we do not normally do. But 2 Corinthians chapter 11, we saw three different If I had this, we would be good to go. We saw three different, is this working? Maybe I didn't have it on. Oh, there it goes. We saw concerned was the first section. Paul was concerned for the Corinthians. And then he gave us this comparison last time you and I were together, where Paul was comparing himself and the false teachers. That's what this section is all about. Paul is trying to remind the Corinthians of his love for them, his concern for them, and remind them that he's the real deal. Not that he's any better than them or on a higher plane than them, but just that he genuinely loves them, and he's wanting to minister to them. And what we'll see tonight is this section called confidence, where we'll pick it up in verse 16 and take it all the way down to the end. And what we are seeing in this is Paul, this is the strangest thing. It's Paul boasting. Boasting is just another word for bragging. In his weaknesses. Who does that? No one does that. No one gets on their social media and brags about their weaknesses. Everybody, there it is. Thank you very much. No wonder it wouldn't work. There was no connection back there. But we always brag about the good things that we do. It's one of the funny things about social media, right? You know it, I know it, everybody knows it, but all we generally see on there is the good. From time to time, you'll have somebody that's really honest, and they'll show you the bad side also, or the rough parts of life. But generally speaking, the idea is to show the glitz and the glamour and the shine, and not to show the bad parts. Well, Paul is actually boasting or bragging in the opposite. He's boasting about his weaknesses, and we'll get into it here in verse 16. And it says, "I say again, let no one think me a fool. If otherwise, at least receive me as a fool, that I also may boast a little." This is not the first time that Paul has called himself a fool or said that he's operating in foolishness. When he started bragging, he said, listen, I'm going to be foolish for a little while. Okay? He goes on to say in verse 17, "What I speak not according to the Lord, but as it were foolishly in this confidence of boasting." Now, we need a little bit of explanation there. What does Paul mean that he's not speaking according to the Lord? Does that mean at this point that God, that the Holy Spirit has stopped speaking through Paul, and he's like, all right, God, step aside, and I'll take it from here? That's not what he's saying. What he's pointing out is that it's not God's normal way of operating to have his servants bragging about things. And so he's saying, in this moment, as I'm bragging or boasting, this is not a godly thing that everybody should be doing. That's the point that he's making there. He's not speaking according to the Lord, because the Lord is all about humility, right? Not boasting, humility. Verse 18 says, "Seeing that many boast according to the flesh, I also will boast." And here's why he does that. Look at verse 19. "For you put up with fools gladly, since you yourselves are wise." Now, I told you several weeks ago when we started studying through 2 Corinthians chapter 11 that Paul was going to be using some sarcasm. This is another one of those moments. He's saying to the Corinthians in verse 19, you guys are so wise that you don't put up with fools. In reality, the Corinthians were operating in foolishness because they were putting up with the false teachers. And Paul is being sarcastic here, trying to wake them up or snap them out of their, kind of spiritual coma, their spiritual zombie state, where they're just following these false teachers and not really paying attention to what the false teachers are doing. And he's actually going to show us, give us some proof that they were just caught up. Look at verse 20. "For you put up with it if one brings you into bondage." So these guys are leading you into slavery, and you're letting them do it. But he doesn't stop there in verse 20. "If one devours you." It's believed that has to do with finances. That these false teachers were not only enslaving these people into into the law, not into grace, but into the law. They were not only enslaving them, but they were also requiring from them money, lots and lots of money. When we first started this study, I showed you, or we talked about man, my mind is all over the place tonight. Down in Guyana, what was his name? Jim Jones. Jim Jones. Anybody remember that? We talked about Jim Jones a little bit. He was the false teacher who had everybody drink Kool-Aid and they all died, okay, because it had cyanide in it. Any of those guys, you can look at any of those guys that have done similar things. David Koresh is another one. Those false teachers oftentimes will get people locked into their church, and then they will put heavy burdens on them and require payment from them. And so Paul is saying this is what they've been doing. You guys have been putting up with it. Verse 20, if one takes from you, again, they devour you, they take from you. If one exalts himself, okay, so he's putting himself up above everybody else. Remember that leaders in the Bible, a biblical leader is going to be a servant leader. A biblical leader is not just a leader who just gets out there and says, all right, do this, do that, do this, do that. But it's going to be somebody who says, do this, do that, do this, do that, and also rolls their sleeves up and gets out there and does it with you. So servant leadership is the style of leadership that is biblical servant leadership. If serving is beneath you, then leadership is beyond you. You ought not be a leader. Paul here is saying that these guys are exalting themselves up above everybody else. If one strikes you on the face. We talked about that in that information about Jim Jones. You look into Jim Jones, the guy was out of his mind, and so was everybody else in his church. He had public spankings in the church on a Sunday morning during church service. He would discipline his church members by bringing them up to the front, and then he would call one of his servants over to literally spank the person for some bad behavior that they had done during the week. And people, you're listening to the story and you go, are you kidding me? Are you serious? Is this real right now? It was absolutely real. They have it recorded. They know it to be a fact. And the church was putting up with it. Isn't that crazy? Now let me ask you something. You know where I'm going with this crazy question. But if I said, you know what, we had camp this past weekend, and I just want to, I want to address something, and I said Tegan was there. And we found out that Tegan didn't have his eyes closed during prayer. And we said, Tegan, get up here, and then I grabbed something, I grabbed Jaden, and it's like, Jaden, get up here. And we bring out a paddle. Look at that, it's already there. So I give him, he gets 20 beatings or whatever, How many of you would stick around? How many of you? Yeah, I didn't mean stick around to watch him, okay? But if you stayed in the room, or you didn't stop me, or even if you didn't stop me, but you just came back on Sunday or Wednesday and acted like, oh, everything's fine, that would be insanity. And if anybody found out about it, they would just go, "What? Are you crazy? What are you doing there?" Yet there have been churches that have actually done this. Now, whether Paul is saying they literally, physically slapped the Corinthians in the face, I do not know. But it's not impossible. It is not a far-off thought that these false teachers were coming in, putting these heavy burdens on the church, and even mistreating them. Verse 21 says, to our shame, Paul says, talking about him and the people that he worked with, to our shame I say that we were too weak for that. Now again, he's being sarcastic. It's not that he was too weak for that. It was a good thing that Paul didn't operate that way. But in whatever anyone is bold, I speak foolishly, I am bold also. Now at this point, verse 22 begins one of my favorite sections in Corinthians. And I was going to say in the Bible, but I probably say that all the time. But certainly in this book. and on into chapter 12 is another one of my favorite accounts there. But look at this in verse 22. Now, this confidence, okay, what he's going to do is, remember, he's foolishly bragging about himself. So the first thing that he starts with is his pedigree, okay, his family lineage, his background. And here's what he says in verse 22. Are they Hebrews? Meaning that he was a Jew. A Hebrew was a Jew of Judean descent, as opposed to a Jew who was born from, some other place. He says, are they Hebrews? So am I. Are they Israelites? In other words, are they from Israel? So am I. Are they the seed of Abraham? So am I. Paul says, listen, I can trace back my lineage all the way back to Abraham. That was a big deal for the Jews. Paul says, who are these guys that are exalting themselves? Because, listen, if they're a Hebrew, so I'm a Hebrew too. Are they an Israelite? So am I. Are they from Abraham? So am I. So what Paul is trying to say is, listen, at the very least, I'm on the same level with these guys, these false teachers. So they're trying to exalt themselves. They're not anything different. What Paul does now is he decides to point out, not only he's just pointed out his pedigree, but now he's going to spend some time talking about his problems. He's actually going to brag or have confidence in his problems. And I'll tell you up front, what Paul is doing is, Paul is saying, listen, these problems are actually a proof that I am the real deal, Paul said. You know that the Christian life, that the normal Christian life involves suffering? Did you know that? We here in the United States, and we do not really always get an accurate picture of what the normal Christian life is like. For us, the normal Christian life is, the Christian T-shirts or hats, and we got Harvest, the crusade during the summer, and we got Christian events and concerts and all of those things. However, there are large parts of the world where the church, Christians, exist, where they have none of those things. The Christian life, a normal Christian life, involves suffering. Jesus told us that in John 16:33. He said, "These things I have spoken to you, that in me you may have peace. In the world you will have tribulation. But be of good cheer," he said, "I have overcome the world." It was a promise. That was a promise that you and I as Christians would have tribulation. We would have trouble. We would have problems. Paul was well acquainted with problems. In Acts chapter 9, prior to this, Paul had been on the way to Damascus. He was on the road to Damascus. Many of us know the story. And there, Jesus met him dramatically on that road and temporarily blinded him. And what he did was, he sent Paul away, and then he got another man, another one of his servants, and he said, "Listen, I want you to go pray for Paul." And here's what he said. But the Lord said to him, this is not to Paul. This is the Lord speaking to this other man. But the Lord said to him, "Go, for he," speaking about Paul, "is a chosen vessel of mine to bear my name before Gentiles, kings, and the children of Israel." Those three groups: Gentiles, kings, and the children of Israel. And then he said this about Paul: "For I will show him how many things he must suffer for my name's sake." Not only was Paul called to share, but he was also called to suffer. Now, probably most of us are not called to suffer the same way that Paul did. But suffering is a normal part of life, and it is a normal part of the Christian life. Some of you have had a very rough start to life. Some of you you were born and maybe you had heart issues, or you had some other developmental issues, or some physical problems. Maybe you've had lots of surgeries or lots of doctor visits, and that has become kind of the norm for you. And what can happen is you can feel like, oh man, like I'm abnormal. Something's wrong with me because all of my other Christian friends, they don't have this many problems. But problems, now Paul is going to specifically talk about persecution. But I'm just talking about, just generally speaking, problems, challenges. Those are a normal part of the Christian life. But so is persecution. And Paul will describe his for us. Those of you that were at camp will remember we talked about the hostilities that Jesus himself endured. Let me just throw those at you again real quickly. This is Jesus at his own synagogue, the synagogue that he belonged to, basically his church. They wanted to kill him. The religious leaders constantly tried to trap and embarrass him. They lied about Jesus, saying he was a drunkard and a glutton. He was betrayed by one of his own disciples. He was mocked and beaten by many. His own people cried out against him, "Crucify him." Isaiah 53 in the Old Testament tells us that he was rejected by people. That there wasn't anything special about him, that when people saw him, he wasn't glowing, he didn't have a halo, he didn't have special clothing on. He was just a normal, probably homely looking individual, because it says there was nothing about his outward appearance that would draw us to him. It goes on to tell us that he was rejected. Rejection is a normal part of the Christian life. And yet, rejection is that one thing that all of us are scared to death of, aren't we? So scared to death. We do not want to be rejected. We want to be accepted and loved by everybody. But that is not reality. Now, Paul says in verse 23, are they ministers of Christ? Now, Paul's going to tell us what the problems were. The first problem was persecution. Are they ministers of Christ? I speak as a fool, I am more. Look at what he says. In labors, more abundant. In stripes, above measure. Paul said to the Thessalonians, we worked day and night that we might not be a burden to any of you. When Paul says, in labors, more abundant, Paul says we were working our fingers to the bone. We were working day and night. Paul would make tents. He actually made tents during the day and sold them so that he could use the money to finance his own ministry, to be able to freely preach to people. So he'd make tents, sell them, use the money to pay for his own food, his own meals, his own whatever, his own supplies, a place to stay, so that he could go out and preach the gospel to people and minister in the church and not have to charge them. And yet the false teachers were saying, well, I can't come, unless there's $1,000 honorarium or whatever. Paul was saying, listen, I did it for free. But he goes on to say, in stripes above measure. You know what stripes are? Military stripes, right? For all of his accomplishments, put all the stripes there? No. That means stripes on his body. He had been whipped so many times. He'll talk some more about it in just a minute. He says, in prisons more frequently. Imagine that. Imagine if your pastor, Pastor Chris was, getting arrested every weekend. It's like, you're going to hear that criminal again? But Paul would end up in prison for preaching the gospel. He says, in deaths often. His life was seemingly always in danger. He was always in danger of dying and having his life taken from him. Verse 24, from the Jews, 5 times I received 40 stripes minus 1. What's 40 minus 1? 39. He says 5 times I was whipped by the Jews. And each time it was 39 times. 39 times. Now, this would not have been the same scourging that the Romans would do. However, being whipped, period. I mean, you ever had somebody I had a couple of cousins, older cousins, a little bit older than me, and we were like brothers. But we would go to the beach. They were just rough boys. You know how boys are, right? Just rough. And these guys were rough, man. I mean, they were bad. That's what they were. And we would go to the beach or we'd go swimming, and their towel would be wet. They would big old towel, roll that thing up and slap each other with it. And you'd be out there just like, I was like a little kid out there playing around, and they would just run by and whack, and just and I'd go crying to my aunt, my uncle, they hit me or whatever, But, I mean, or a wet, you ever had anybody get you with a wet shoelace?
No.
You're like, no, I never thought about that. I wish I would have known about that before camp. I know. But can you imagine being whipped with a whip 5 times and each time 39 times? Paul says in verse 25, 3 times I was beaten with rods. It's believed that that's one of the things that the Romans would do, beat with rods. Once I was stoned. Not that kind of stoned. That means that they tried to kill him with rocks. I love that story. Paul, they drag him out of the city and they stone him, and they take these rocks and they stone him. And they leave him there for dead, and then he gets back up. He gets back up and walks back into the same city that he just came out of. They just got thrown out of. So I just, in my mind, I think, man, what did he look? I mean, he must have just been all bloody, head split open or whatever. I mean, they thought he was dead. I happen to think that he died. But we'll talk about that in the next chapter. But they stoned him, okay? He says, once I was stoned, 3 times I was shipwrecked. I would have stopped sailing after the first time. A night and a day, this is the scariest one for me. A night and a day I've been in the deep. I think what he means is that a night and a day he was out floating in the ocean. I love the ocean. But floating in it, especially at night, Jaws is out there, right? And the same shark that took Bethany Hamilton's arm, that shark is out there too. And it doesn't matter where I'm at. There's some kind of sea beast out there. Something is out there that's going to pull me under. And yet Paul spent a night and a day out there in the deep. In verse 26, one of his problems was perils. That's dangers. In journeys, often, so he's constantly traveling, it is said of Paul that there was no one in the ancient world, as far as recorded history is concerned, that traveled more than Paul. Constantly on the move. In perils, again, the word means dangers. In perils of waters, in perils of robbers, in perils of my own countrymen, Jews that wanted to kill him, in perils of the Gentiles wanted to kill him, in perils in the city, and you know the city's bad, right? In perils in the wilderness too, in perils in the sea, in perils among false brethren, constantly in danger. He's not done bragging. Now he brags about his privation. In weariness, and I'll explain what that is in case you're not sure. Anybody ever heard of deprivation? Okay, we'll talk about that in just a second. In weariness and toil. In sleeplessness, often. Sounds like winter camp. In hunger and thirst. In fastings, often. In cold and nakedness. That's terrifying for me. Privation means the basic necessities are lacking. Paul says there were often times when I did not have enough clothing, did not have enough food, did not have enough to drink, did not have enough sleep. And then he says finally in verses 28 and 29, the fourth of his problems was pressure. Besides the other things, besides all this, what comes upon me daily, my deep concern for all the churches. He had a deep concern for the churches, that pressure, constantly pressuring him. And he describes it for us. Who is weak, and I am not weak? Who is made to stumble, and I do not burn with indignation. So Paul suffered along, not only in all of these physical things, but also mentally as he was concerned about all of the churches. All of this weighing on Paul, and Paul's point is this. Paul's point is, listen, I am the real deal. I'm really an apostle. That doesn't make me any better than you. It just means that I'm the real deal, guys, Corinthians. And Corinthians, you've been questioning my validity, but I'm the real deal. And the reason, or the proof that I have, is that because I'm the real deal, I have experienced all of this. This is my life, he's saying. It's a normal part of the Christian life, suffering. We know very, very little of it. Very little of it. For us, if we get up in the morning and, there are no Pop-Tarts in the kitchen, lama, lama sabachthani, Eloi, Eloi, lama sabachthani, my God, why have you forsaken me? There's no Pop-Tarts, We know very little of suffering. Now again, some of you have had suffering. You've had a rough time in this first part of your life, or maybe family stuff, has been rough. But persecution, all of these things, these are actually normal parts of the Christian life. And what a coinkydink, that many of us would just be coming back from camp, talking about what? Talking about running the race, about enduring the hardships. Remember that? And the strain and the stress that goes along with it. Those are normal parts of the Christian life. Paul finishes in verse 30 through 33 by saying, if I must boast, I will boast in the things which concern my infirmity. That's my weaknesses. Who does that? But Paul is saying that the weaknesses, all of this stuff, is proof that he was the real deal. He really did love them. He was the genuine article. The God and Father of our Lord Jesus Christ, who is blessed forever, knows that I am not lying. He gives us one story here. In Damascus, the governor under Aretas, the king, was guarding the city of the Damascenes with a garrison, desiring to arrest me. But I was let down in a basket through a window in the wall and escaped from his hands by the skin of his teeth. And those things happened over and over and over and over again. Difficulties, hardships. Why? Because serving the Lord is not an admirable thing for our enemy, Satan. And so he's attacking Paul and not the false teachers. Why is that? Because Satan wants the false teachers there to lead the people astray. He's attacking Paul because Paul's eyes are fixed on Jesus. Same for us. When our eyes are fixed on Jesus, you can be sure that sufferings and hardship and Satan will be there. Satan will use those difficulties, these problems, the persecutions, the perils, the privation, the pressure, all of that, to distract us from the Lord. And the Lord, at the same time, is attempting to use those things to strengthen our resolve in Him. I have a sense right now that you and I are in for it. Things are going so well right now, I think that we can all agree with that. Many of us are just coming back from camp, got that camp high going on, and it's a good thing. We're now heading into, many of us are going on the mission field to Mexico. After that, we'll be getting ready for the Nicaragua trip. We got summer camp plans already at the beach. Things are going very well. We're in here tonight worshiping with all of our hearts, lifting our hands, or we're raising our voices in our hands. Things are going very, very well. You and I must be on our guard. The enemy is not happy about what you and I are doing. And so it's important that you and I recognize that as the hardships begin to come and the challenges, because no doubt Satan is going to try and get his crusty foot in here and try to break us up. And, right now we're experiencing a unity. Right now we're experiencing a unity, a love for one another, genuine, I believe. And the enemy is going to try and break that up. You and I need to understand that. And you and I not only need to do what? We need to do two things. We need to look unto Jesus. Some of you will remember that from Hebrews chapter 12. Look unto Jesus, and we need to consider Jesus. We need to keep our eyes fixed on Jesus. And you know what else we need to do? We need to love one another, support one another. Because what's going to happen is your homie that's in here, best BFFs, Christians, and, going to come in here, and he or she's just going to be in a mood one of these days. And you're going to be like, what's your problem? Yeah. And then drama starts. We have to be on our guard and love one another no matter what. But just loving one another is not enough. We have to be praying for one another. We got to be that 12th man for one another, supporting one another, correcting one another. We've got to be on our guard. Suffering is a normal part of the Christian life. How do we handle it? By looking unto Jesus, by considering Jesus, the author and finisher of our faith, who for the joy set before him endured the what? The shame, right? He endured it. He endured all of it, despising the shame. Endured the cross, despising the shame. We got to do the same thing. This is a normal part. This is what Paul is describing here. Though Paul seems to have experienced it in excess, still suffering is a part of the normal Christian life. Father, we need your help, please.